In an effort to contribute to the topic of scapegoating of religious minorities and the broader discussion about protecting human rights and religious freedom around the world, I want to focus on cultural heritage policies as they relate to the sustainability of religious minorities in a religiously plural world. Cultural heritage policy, in fact, gets relatively little attention in the interface between human rights and religious freedom on the one hand and human security on the other. But I think it's worth emphasizing that both state and non state actors utilize quite systematically cultural heritage for the broader purpose of building exclusivist models of nationalism and this is very common in non democratic regimes, whether authoritarian or totalitarian. But unfortunately, we see it in less obvious ways in democratic regimes as well. So, cultural and religious heritage become part of the project of developing national identities that are hegemonic in religious terms, they're inflexible and exclusivist, and they're intrinsically incompatible with the kind of religious pluralism that defines today's world. It's also worth pointing out that cultural heritage or management of tangible, that is, material sites, properties, and intangible, that is, behaviors, practices, including worship forms, music, language, that cultural heritage is in fact protected under an expansive set of international legal frameworks and multilateral institutions, from the Hague Conventions, the Geneva Protocols, to UNESCO and the ICC, the International Criminal Court structures. All of these are designed to ensure the protection of cultural heritage and religious heritage as a subcomponent of that in times of peace and war. And it's also worth emphasizing that there is a recognition of the intrinsic relationship between the protection of cultural heritage on the one hand and rights to international religious freedom on the other. For example, Article 27 of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, states that everyone has the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, to enjoy the arts, and to share in scientific advancement and benefits. Article 5 of the 2001 UNESCO Declaration on Cultural Diversity also recognizes cultural rights as inseparable from human rights, recognizing that cultural heritage and cultural rights cannot be used to limit other human rights, and that would include religious freedom. And if we think about cultural heritage and its links to religious freedom, we see that the recognition of the right to freedom of belief, conscience, religion, worship, the associated rights of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and the right to own property, all of these human rights, civil and political liberties are intrinsically connected, and cultural heritage becomes a tool and a mechanism for either violating or for amplifying religious freedom. I want to just say a bit about state and non state actors. Both of them practice violent and non violent forms of scapegoating of religious communities by the way in which they approach cultural heritage. And I would like to share just a few instructive cases and very, very synoptically that help to underscore this linkage between cultural heritage on the one hand and religious freedom protections on the other. Most recently in the news, have been two cases in Turkey. The announcement by the Turkish state of the reversion of the Hagia Sophia and the Hora Church of the Holy Savior to mosques. There has been a lot of media coverage on this, but it's worth pointing out that the reversion of these two ancient Christian sites that had been converted to mosques and then museums and now back to mosques has been accompanied by the explicit use of conquest discourse and behaviors by members of the Turkish state and by religious authorities associated with the Turkish state. And the message here, most, I think, thrown into sharpest relief when the head of the religious affairs ministry in Turkey ascended the minbar in Hagia Sophia with a sword. It sends an explicit signal to Turkey's vulnerable Christian populations that they are second class. It sends an explicit message to the ecumenical patriarchate in Turkey, whose see is at Hagia Sophia, that he and his community are second-class citizens, but it sends a broader message to Turkey's other minority communities, Jews, Alevis, and others, that they are subjected to second-class status inside Turkey. Another case, as the previous professor just underscored, involves the case of India. And again, also highly mediatized in the last several months. August, September developments related to the Babri Mosque site in the northern India town of Ayodhya. It's the site that is also claimed as the birthplace of the Hindu god Lord Ram. And in August, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi laid the cornerstone of a grand Hindu shrine on the site of the Babri Mosque, which in fact in 1992 had been the location of attacks on that cultural religious heritage site that sparked riots that killed thousands of Muslims in India. And most recently, there was a decision by the Indian Supreme Court that acquitted all of those individuals, many of whom are now members of India's BJP government, as they called them anti-socials who hadn't planned the work. So the message here again is that India's 200 million strong Muslim community are second-class citizens and they're being scapegoated. Some other cases that relate to actions against cultural heritage by non-state actors, and in these cases we're talking about state actors in times of at least formal peace. Other cases involve actions by non-state actors in times of war. And two of the best known, but I think again it's worth emphasizing them because it highlights this linkage between cultural heritage, remembrance of disappeared communities, and also sustainability of living communities, involve the destruction of the Buddhas of Bamyan in Afghanistan. Those Buddhas were one of I think they were the tall, yes, they were the tallest monuments of Buddha anywhere in the world. They were the side of cliffs, and they were in 2001. They were destroyed by the Taliban, erasing the memory of the presence of Buddhists in South Asia and that part of South Asia. And then finally, again, in a time of war, the destruction of the temple of Baal in Palmyra, Syria, by ISIS. So to wrap up, these are examples that indicate the ways in which cultural heritage policy and the protection of cultural heritage also allows for remembrance and sustainability of religious minority communities around the world. And so we need to keep this in mind as we also keep in mind that human rights is worth the fight. Thank you very much.